Talking with Dr. Jarrod Spencer. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's a psychologist, most importantly, and he's talking about the mind of the athlete. Dr. Spencer, last time we had our conversation, we focused a lot more on the high school athlete. But I want to talk to you a little bit today about the pro athlete. Obviously, pro athletes have been dealing a little bit more with sports psychologists for probably a longer period of time. But it's similar but different, I would think, for a professional athlete. With a high school kid, it's that shock because of losing their season. But for a professional athlete, it's a very similar type of loss because theirs came, if you're a professional basketball player or hockey player, you lost it during your season. But for baseball players, it was the sudden, are we or aren't we going to play the season out? So it's kind of similar, but it's kind of different, but it's still athletes potentially losing their season.
It's still a theme of loss, and it's different for an adolescent, a high school kid, versus a pro. And one reason why it's different is the level of emotional coping skills. And so it is a little bit harder in some ways for the high school athlete who might not be able to understand. And quite frankly, this may be the end of their athletic journey as well. For the professional athlete, they've got more resources in place. They've got more emotional maturity. They can understand and see this thing from different perspectives, different angles, different levels. And so that definitely is one reason why it may be a little bit easier for the pro. Now, that being said, the pro athletes have all kinds of higher stakes. What does this mean if it's a contract year? What if this means if it's the end of my season or career and I didn't even realize I just played my last game? And what does it mean in terms of travel? Many athletes are traveling all around the country back to their homes and into different states, maybe in different countries. So that's a different variable when we're talking about the 21, 22-year-old to 32-year-old athlete. And as you factor in things such as family and having kids as well.
And by the time they're at the stage of being a professional athlete, more than likely they have experienced the loss of a season because of an injury. And oftentimes coming back from an injury, there is the physical aspect of the comeback, but the mental aspect of the comeback is just as important.
Well, the longer you stay in sports, the more you're going to get injured and you're going to experience loss of a season. And why that's significant is because when we go through this pandemic and we go through the concept of a loss, for every person, it does bring up the past experiences we had with loss. Maybe when somebody tore an ACL and they were out for a whole season, or maybe when there was an issue regarding being demoted, maybe down to the minors, and that felt like a loss on their end. And so the theme of loss is something that all of us are struggling with. And for professional athletes, it's no different because they've experienced loss in different ways, but all the same, it's very important to them.
And you mentioned this just a moment ago about the travel aspect of professional athletes. And, you get into baseball or even basketball in some degrees, you're going away for an extended period of time. Baseball, you talk about a long road trip of about 10 to 12 games of being away. But the proposal that's out there is the potential for Major League Baseball to go to Arizona or Florida or a combination of the two and essentially lock the athletes down and play their entire season. And there's been some professional athletes. We had a conversation on our show a few weeks ago here on Coronavirus Impact with Neil Walker, who's in camp with the Philadelphia Phillies, to say, look, I don't know if I want to be away from my family for 4 months. It's a very different variable that professional athletes are not really running into full force.
And one of the key aspects is this: support. Support is one of the number one factors in performance. And if we remove the support system from the individuals, meaning the girlfriend, the spouse, their children, for example, then there's a period of time which any person can easily do that. And then there's a period of time where it's going to be a lot harder. They're going to feel the strain. It actually can become counterproductive. And so if sports are going to continue to move forward professionally, I do think that the mental health aspects of all of that are something that should be taken into consideration if we're looking for optimal performance.
And so let's get into a little bit more about the mind of the athlete, which is a fascinating subject. Obviously, you've made a living talking about the mind of the athlete. It's something that I kind of look at from afar, but it is such an aspect of professional sports because if you want to be a good athlete at any level, you have to have a certain level of confidence in order to perform at a higher level. And the more self-confidence you have, the better. Yet for a lot of athletes, I got to imagine that there is an aspect of a lack of confidence or a fear of failure. The old aspect of baseball that if you get a hit three times out of 10 at bats, you're in the Hall of Fame. But then there's the glass half empty aspect that means you also failed 7 out of 10 times. And so I would think that there's an aspect of that fear of failure that's very prevalent in the mind of a professional athlete.
And it doesn't ever go away. And that's the misnomer, is that many people will look at these athletes and say, my goodness, she looks so big and strong and tough and skilled and confident. Well, the reality is she, like many other athletes, struggle with confidence. And so what we don't know is behind the scenes, a person may be saying, hey, this is a contract year, and I've got to find a way to perform well. Or maybe there's somebody younger coming up behind me, and I'm lacking some of my confidence because I'm aged. I'm a little bit older. And so I wonder if I'm going to get a renewal of a contract, or if I'm going to lose my starting position, then get traded away. And so no matter where a person's at on the journey, confidence is very oftentimes a significant variable. And here's one reason why. The definition of confidence is the depth of self-belief that a person has the skills necessary to achieve a desired goal. Well, of course they have the depth to a certain degree, but how deep is it? And is it deep enough to get a hit off of that amazing pitcher? Well, we'll find out how deep that belief really is. So for everybody along the journey at different points, that depth may ebb and flow a bit.
I find it fascinating, and so many people have been watching. The ratings are off the charts for the series that's going on right now about the Chicago Bulls, the Last Dance series that's going on, and it's really an opportunity to see kind of behind the curtain, if you will, for a lot of people, what happens in the world of professional athletes, and really the ultimate alpha male in Michael Jordan, who was driven to succeed not just as a professional athlete, but he ultimately really was the ultimate warrior when it came to the mind game, driving not only himself to exceed, but as people are now seeing as well, driven and forcing his teammates to succeed as well.
You know, the perception and the reality may not always match up. And so, look, professional sports is part of the entertainment business. And so what is portrayed out there for game day is only a small part of the larger story in any sport about what's going on, what's the reality. And quite frankly, it's not always very glamorous. And so but what we do know is it's always very emotional. And when you deal with some of the best people in the world at a particular craft, there's going to be egos, there's going to be tension, there's going to be strained relationships, and there's going to be people that are driving and pushing other people and making them better, and sometimes in some situations making them worse. That is part of the beauty of The Last Dance. Is I do give a lot of credit to Phil Jackson. I think he was a masterful guy and able to understand the personalities of a number of narcissists, be able to bring out the best in each individual so that they could all collectively work as one unit. Phil Jackson did a great job with the Bulls. He also did a great job with the Lakers with that capability. And the reason? Phil Jackson's been very open and is very open to the path of mental health sports psychology as an avid studier of the field.
And people forget, Phil Jackson was a very good basketball player in his own right, but it's a great point, because if you're going to be a coach, and really at any level, doesn't matter what level you are, you don't just need to know X's and O's. You need to know how to weave players together. And I've talked to a number of athletes and talked to some athletes who have gone on to coach and asked them what they learned as an athlete that they now apply to being a coach. And I've had more than one say they learned how to put a team together. And that really gets back to the mental aspects you're talking about, because when you get into pro athletes, you're around each other so much more, so much longer. And again, back to those road trips where you're spending hours and hours and hours with one another, and it's quite easy to get on each other's nerves over the long haul.
Yes, and that's one reason why we see in professional sports, every team is looking for a competitive advantage. They're looking for a way to get an edge. And having a doctoral level licensed sports psychologist is just one example of how they could utilize those kind of services to help decrease any strained relationships, help them, as I often say, clear the mind so the person can have a clearer mind and better performance.
And that leads me to what I want to talk to you next about. And that is, you've written a book about this. And please tell us the name of your book and how people can go about getting it.
Sure. So the book is called Mind of the Athlete, Clear Mind, Better Performance. Got a copy down here.
There you go.
And so Mind of the Athlete, Clear Mind, Better Performance is the name of the book. And really it's written in a way that's going to describe a model for how the mind actually works best, helping you to clear out your mind. Well, how do I actually do that? How do I manage the pressure? How do I increase my confidence? How do I have less nervousness? And so it really focuses on putting the tools in one's mental toolbox as well.
It's a fascinating subject, and Doctor, you're as good as anybody in talking about it. Really appreciate you giving us the time to talk a little bit more about the mind of an athlete, whether it be at the high school level, the collegiate level, or the professional level.
Thanks so much, Bob. Really appreciate it as well. Thank you.
Dr. Jarrod Spencer talking to us about the mind of the athlete.